Greetings YouTube, this is Chris McKee with Alamo Music Center in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. It is January 2018. It is the time of the year where all of us gear nerds get excited because NAMM is taking place in California. All of the new stuff is coming out ready to drain our wallets. And Fender has come out with a new line of vintage-inspired guitars made here in the USA to entice you with some great vintage vibe but modern playability. And so what we wanted to do was show you the lineup that is now available from Fender, explain to you what it is, why it's different, and why they've gone in this direction. So what I'm holding in here in my lap is a representation of this line. The new line is the American Original Series, and they are all built and manufactured in California at their American facility. Now, Fender for a number of years has been making a vintage-inspired line of guitars. In the US, if you wanted a vintage-style guitar, you had two options. You could purchase something from the custom shop, and there's a wide variety of guitars from Fender's custom shop there, or you could get something from the American Vintage Series. This is basically a take on the American Vintage Series with a few tweaks that answer the need of players today. So let's talk about what the American Vintage Series was first. The American Vintage Series was basically copies of vintage guitars. So a 52 Telecaster in the American Vintage Series was a copy of a reference 1952 Telecaster. The neck shape, the type of finish, the pickups, the hardware, everything. They even used the same machinery to build the electronics and whatnot. Now, to be fair, it was actually probably more consistent than the guitars that were coming out in 1952 were. And what Fender did was take specific year references to build these guitars. And it's important because, you know, back then it wasn't like it is today. Back then there was no NAMM show and check out the new line for this year. They were changing stuff all of the time. And so you could pick, say, a 65 or a 59 or a 58 Strat, and maybe a few in that year, and see what was going on and what was changing and the colors that were available and whatnot. What they were doing was making copies from these reference guitars. And you would have things like a 52 Tele, a 56 Strat, a 59 Strat, you know, different year-specific guitars. And everything was just like they built back then, vintage cases, vintage straps. They would even give you reproduction advertisements from the guitars that were built at that era. And they're very cool guitars. If you were wanting something that was built just like back then that was what was available to you. What's interesting though is that in the custom shop, the other place where you could get a reproduction vintage guitar from Fender, one of the most common options that was requested was a different radius on the fingerboard. And this gets a little geeky as we're talking about what a radius is, but it's important to understand that so that you know what they've done with this series. The radius is the curvature of the fingerboard, and that's probably going to be out of focus, but if you could look down there, the fingerboard has a curve to it. It's not perfectly flat. So if you took a circle and you cut a portion off of it, that's the radius. And a smaller circle has a rounder radius than a bigger circle does. So all of those guitars that Leo Fender and group made back in the day had a radius of 7 1/4 or 7.25 inches in, you know, radius of a circle. It's a round radius and it's pretty comfortable for chording. But here's what would happen. As you moved up the neck, if you picked something, say at a B string, and you tried to bend it, it would hit the peak of the middle of the fingerboard on the, you know, higher frets because of that curvature. And so artists got around this doing one of two things. They had high action, like Stevie Ray Vaughan. People have known that his action was really, really high, thick strings and all of that. And the other way that he would do it is, or that people would do it, is that they would just have their fingerboards redone. They would just take it into a luthier and say, you know, here's my 57 Strat. Can you make it flatter and so I can bend with lower action? And they would do that. So in our modern interpretation, the custom shop, that's what they did. With the introduction of this new American Original Series, that's what Fender has done. They've taken the most popular models that were in that lineup, and rather than saying It is a specific copy of this year vintage guitar. They've said this is a guitar that is inspired by this era of guitars. And all of the specs that are coming on it are similar to what you would have found during that era. 52 pickups or 65 pickups or 62 pickups, what have you. Nitrocellulose finishes, thicker necks with profiles that are specific to that time frame. But they all have a 9.5-inch radius, and that's the same radius that you would find on an American Professional, Telecaster, Stratocaster, Jaguar, or Jazzmaster. And so the playability is modern, the tone is vintage, the vibe is vintage. You get the best of both worlds, and you're kind of getting some of the features that you would have found in the custom shop for a lower price, and something that's pretty dang cool. So this Ocean Turquoise Jazzmaster that I have is an example of that. And we're going to go through each guitar that's in that lineup and tell you what the specs are and let you hear it for yourself so you can see how awesome these new guitars are. So let's check it out. So this is the new for 2018 American Original Series 60s Jazzmaster. It's available in 3 colors, but let's face it, everyone wants the Ocean Turquoise, right? Because this is an amazing color, tortoiseshell pickguard, it's awesome. Let's talk about some of the specs. It is a nitrocellulose finish. You get the 1965 pure vintage Fender Jazzmaster pickups, and it is set up just like a vintage Jazzmaster. So vintage style hardware, F-style tuners up here, the vintage style bridge, the locking vibrato or tremolo system. And then on a Jazzmaster or Jaguar, what you'll see is they have a different circuit, which is pretty cool. You've got your normal controls, volume and tone with a 3-way toggle switch, which will give you either the neck, bridge, or both pickups. And then the switches up here, which a lot of people get confused about, basically gives you a different circuit. It's called the rhythm circuit. So when you switch to this circuit, it gives you a different volume and a different tone control that has a treble bleed circuit and rolls off some of the highs to actually give you a jazzy sound, hence the name Jazzmaster. So it's a pretty cool, setup that you've got here, a lot of versatility. It has a alder body, maple neck with a rosewood fingerboard that is bound. This is what we call a rosewood lam or laminate fingerboard because it's vintage specific. It was a laminate of rosewood that was smacked onto the maple necks back then and then bound beautifully with this white binding. The neck shape is kind of a thick C. So it's a round C shape similar to what you'd find in a modern Stratocaster, but with a little bit more meat on the back of the neck, a little chunkier in your hand, but very, very comfortable. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it is a 9.5-inch radius of vintage correct fret height. So nothing jumbo here or anything like that. And it's real rosewood, folks. Actual rosewood on this beautiful fingerboard. And then the larger Jazzmaster headstock adorned there with the Jazzmaster logo. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful guitar and wonderful tones. So let's see what we can coax out of it for you. So I'm playing into a 2018 Hot Rod DeVille version 4, and we're playing on the drive channel so that we can turn up and turn down to get our clean or our nitty gritty. So we're going to start with the bridge pickup and then go through to both the neck and then the rhythm circuit. Let's demonstrate the vintage or the rhythm circuit. So you can go from this to this. Okay, so that's bridge pickup. neck pickup with the rhythm circuit. There's your volume. There's your tone. So there's your neck pickup on the normal circuit. All right, so here is the 2018 American Originals 50s Strat. So again, not from a specific year, but rather from that era. Here are the specs on it. This luscious example is in a beautiful white blonde transparent finish. It's got an ash body, so there's lots of beautiful grain to come through on that finish. And this is a two-piece book-matched top. So yeah, really nice. Such a good piece that it took me forever to find where it was book matched at, and it's right down the middle. These come with 59 pure vintage Strat pickups, and they are vintage staggered pole piece Stratocaster pickups. Your typical arrangement of 2 volumes or 2 tones and a volume knob, but you have modern 5-way switching here, so you get all of that creamy second and fourth position in between goodness that we like from our Stratocasters. It's a maple neck, maple fretboard. Actually, it's just a neck, and the frets are smack dab in the neck like Leo intended it to be. Bone nut on all of these, vintage hardware, right? Gosh, it just sounds and feels amazing. Nitrocellulose finish. The neck carve on this one is 50s accurate, so it's a chunky neck. You can kind of see that, and it's a soft V. It's so soft that it really almost feels like a U-shaped neck you'd find on a 50s Telecaster, but it's not quite. You can feel mostly down in this area that there's a little bit rolled off the bass side and the treble side, and it's a really comfortable neck. If you're looking for an Ibanez Wizard neck, it ain't here, folks. But if you're looking for a really comfortable Fender neck, this is really, really nice. So, and again, 9.5-inch radius. So you've got this, kind of thick neck, which fits in the hand really well, but you've got this flatter fretboard so that when you're up here and you bend that B, you didn't choke out. Sounds creamy. Let's go through the sounds. We're just going to start with position 1. If you're not familiar with Stratocaster switching, here's what you get. Position 1, which is the switch all the way down, it's going to be your bridge pickup. 2 is both the middle and the bridge. Then you've got just the middle pickup on its own in position 3. 4 is middle and neck, and 5 is just the neck pickup. Wonderful sounds. Let's take a look at it. We're going to play it with the volumes all the way on 10, or the tones on all the way on 10. Lots of great sounds, a lot of brightness out of every position. Maple, ash, single coil pickups, bell-like. So that's the 50s original, American original Strat for 2018. Check out this beauty. So this is the American original 60s Stratocaster. It's available in a few different colors. This one is beautiful candy apple red, and it does look good enough to eat, but we're gonna play it instead. The specs on it are very different from the 50s, and the tone of it is very different from the 50s Strat, and you'll hear that hopefully in the video. So the 50 Strat has this great 50 sound to it, and it's got this wonderful bright bell-like chime. This 60s guitar, which features pure vintage 65 Strat pickups, has a real warmth to it. And part of that is probably because of the rosewood fingerboard that's on it, and part of it is because of the pickups that were there. And it's interesting to play the two back and forth. You hear the 50s in one, and you hear the 60s in the other, and it's fantastic. Otherwise, it's an alder body. You've got your typical Strat setup with your 5-way switch, vintage hardware and bridge, bone nut. It's got, again, a chunky C shape on the maple neck, and then a 9.5-inch radius on the rosewood fingerboard. And yeah, it's awesome. This one, one of the things we should point out is as you go through the different eras of these guitars, the cases line up as well. So the 50s era guitars come with a tweed case. The 60s era Strat and Tele come with a black Telex case that was correct for that era. And then the offsets, the Jaguar and the Jazzmaster, come in a brown Telex case with a wonderful gold velour interior. So they've really given us what we want. Little thing to also point out, if you compare this to the 50s Strat, the logo's changed. And that's what actually happened at Fender. All of these things were changing, and in the 60s, the logo changed and became a little bit, a little chunkier, a little bit more, a little bolder and outlined and everything. So it's pretty cool to kind of take a journey through time with these guitars. Yeah, I've got a tough job. Let's listen to it and see what it sounds like. All right, so for the 2018 American Original Series, we have this beautiful 50s Telecaster in butterscotch blonde with a black pickguard. And this is honestly where everything started. The Telecaster, with a few variations at its entry, is the first guitar that Leo Fender made. And he got it right. I mean, it's a single cutaway cutting board with a neck, but it works so well. It sounds amazing, and it stood the test of time. I mean, you look at how many people play Telecaster still today, and the guitar's design hasn't really changed that much other than being refined in particular eras, because he got it so right out of the gate. So what's changed for the original series version of the Telecaster? Well, honestly, not much. If you have been familiar with the 52 Tele that was part of the American Vintage line, guess what? This is basically a 52 Tele. And that's a good thing, because the 52 Tele is like the Telecaster. And I love the color. I don't know that I'd want anything else in this color. I don't think I'd wear a shirt in this color, but it works on this guitar, and I love it. So since it's a 52, in the 50s era, it is a chunky V-shaped neck, vintage hardware. It is an ash body with this butterscotch blonde finish. It's nitrocellulose finish, single ply black pick guard, and then you've got your rounded knurled knobs, a three-way switch, brass bridge saddles, which are vintage correct to the 50s era, and then your nice, bright, loud, I'm here, and no one's gonna stop me bridge pickup, and then your Telecaster warm neck pickup. It has the 9.5-inch radius. That's basically the only thing that's changed. And so you're getting the most requested feature, the thing that I've wanted in a 52 reissued Telecaster, a 9.5-inch radius, so it plays well and you can bend it and you can have low action at the same time. So let's show you what it sounds like. It sounds like a 52 Tele. It just plays a lot better than the ones with the tighter radius do. And if you're not familiar, let me point this out. These are single coil pickups. They're Telecaster pickups. They're different than what you'll find on a Stratocaster. The neck pickup, which has this cover on it, is obviously, if you can't tell, smaller than what you'll find on a Stratocaster. It is not that same size, and it is directly mounted to the body, and it has this wonderful warmth to it. Part of the reason for this cover that Leo Fender put on it was to actually roll off some of the high end. So it's already got a more warm characteristic to it, being closer to the neck and picking up this part of the strings on the frequency, and then putting that cover on it also kind of takes off some of the highs that you would otherwise get if the magnets were just exposed. Coming down here to the bridge pickup, however, we've gone the opposite direction. The pickup's bigger, it's chunkier, it has more winds on it, it's got a big, massive piece of metal on the bottom, creating this huge combined with, like, look at the bridge, okay? This is a massive, chunky bridge, chunky pickup. It has this huge, like, electromagnetic field, and it's at the brightest part of the strings, angled to give you the brightest section of the high E string on the pickup. And it works incredibly well because not only is it picking up this bright articulation, but it's like, it's meaty. It's like the best. You sit down at a steak and it's cooked just right, and it's just a little pink in the middle, and there's some good gristle, and you could cut it, and it's tender, but it's that's the pickup. All right. Let me hear you. Let you hear the. We're gonna start with the neck pickup. We're gonna go from warmth to gristle. So let's check it out. And if that sounds familiar, you've heard it before. On countless records, this guitar's been there, it's still here, and it plays like stank. So, glad it's part of the lineup and they've brought it the way they have. The 50s Tele. Now, just like there's a 60s Stratocaster in this lineup in the American Original series, there's a 60s Telecaster in this lineup, and I'm not holding it in my lap. This is the 50s model, but I couldn't leave it out, and we had it, and it found a home really, really fast, and so we couldn't include it in our video. But I wanted to tell you the specs of it. It's basically a 60s custom Telecaster, and it has 60s era specs. It's a thinner neck than the 50s model. It has 65 pure vintage Telecaster pickups. It has stainless steel saddles instead of the brass ones, and it is double bound, so it's got binding on the top and the back of the body, along with a rosewood fingerboard on the maple neck, and a different, more 60s Fender logo, and it says custom Telecaster on the headstock. Tonally, it's warmer. So what you should hear in our reviews is that the 50s guitars are brighter and the 60s guitars are warmer, partly to do with the rosewood fingerboards, partly to do with the alder versus ash bodies, and partly to do with the pickups of that era being reproduced in these guitars. And so it's fantastic, and my favorite color is Lake Placid Blue. It's what we got in our initial run, and these are still coming in, and it found a home really, really fast. So congrats to the guy who got it, and I know he's excited to get it. And you know, we'll do another review and demonstration for you once we have some more. But I wanted to make sure that you knew about that in its lineup. So let's check out the next guitar. All right, continuing the American Original series is the 60s Jaguar. This offset, along with its stablemate, the Jazzmaster, was introduced in the 60s, and this at the time was the top of the line guitar from Fender. Now, fairly enough, it hasn't gotten the love originally that the Telecaster and Stratocaster has. Instead, both the Jazzmaster and Jaguar found a home in really kind of a counterculture musical movement, but they're fantastic guitars. And this one shows some of the cool features that was available at the time to give you a lot of versatility in this guitar. So first of all, like the Jazzmaster, it has this wonderful offset body. And if you haven't ever played an offset, particularly putting one in your lap, they are extremely comfortable bodies. Ask Elvis Costello, he'll tell you. It has vintage correct hardware. It's got a chunky C-shaped neck. Laminate rosewood on the fingerboard here. It's bound, bone nut, like I said, vintage tuners. It's got the larger headstock here with the correct era logo. And it has two single coil Jaguar pickups. They're not the same type of single coil that's on a Strat, by the way. These are different. They're shielded. The magnets are different. The whole character and nature of tone that you get out of these is very, very different. You have a single tone and volume control here, and you also have a circuit up here that you switch on, which is a rhythm circuit. This goes through a filter that cuts off some of the highs and gives you a nice, really rich warmth to the tone of the guitar. And then you notice that there's not a 5-way blade switch. There's not a 3-way toggle switch anywhere on this. Instead, you have 3 different switches down here. And I like to joke that this is the silent guitar because if you put them all in the down position, you get nothing. These are on-off switches, the first two, for the 2 pickups. So this one is the on-off switch for the neck pickup, or yeah, the neck pickup. Okay, the next one is the on-off switch for the bridge. So you can have either, or both, or neither, you know, depending upon whatever gig you're playing. The third switch has endearly been called the strangle because what it does is it takes it and goes through a pass filter. With both pickups on, you kind of get this out of phase sound, but it also changes the tone in each individual pickup selection sound as such. And then of course this is all bypassed once we go to the rhythm circuit. Another interesting aspect of 60s guitars, and remember this was like Jet Set era, right? The V's were coming out and everything. This has this cool doohickey and it's a mute. That's the official term for it, by the way, is doohickey, not mute. But it's a mute switch attached to the bridge, and what it does is it gives you a sound similar to palm muting. in case you didn't have a Palm. And if you ever find a vintage 60s Jaguar, you're probably not going to find one with one of these intact because they pretty much disintegrated over time. But it's pretty cool if you want like a little kalimba sound or something. So we're going to go through some sounds. I'll engage the mute so you can hear what it sounds like. But overall, this has all of the vibe of the original that you could play and you could bend on, which is pretty cool. So let's check it out. The bridge pickup only with the strangle switch engaged has this kind of telly tone to it. Check it out. Here's without it and with it. Kind of fun in its own right. So there you have it. Some of the specs and the rundown of the sounds that you can get out of this extremely versatile guitar. Jaguars and Jazzmasters have found a community that love them. People are beginning to discover now what awesome guitars these are. So you should take a look if you haven't. So that's the lineup for 2018 in the Fender American Original Series. As we've talked about, they've taken what has been a beloved series of the American Vintage and given the people what they want, modern playability in a 9.5-inch radius, and focusing on the eras that made these guitars great, rather than really kind of confusing us sometimes with the minutia of particular years that were available. All in all, it equates to better guitars that are easier to understand, easier to play, and sound amazing. So these are available in stores now, with more coming each and every day. If you'd like more information about the specs of these guitars, the pricing, or the colors available, go to our website at alamomusic.com. I want to thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.